Welcome to another episode of the 1946 podcast. This is season 1
the Culture Shift Tour.
with your host, Brent Roberts.
And I am Sharon Rocky Roggio. Content warning. This episode contains talk on self-harm. If you or someone you know is in an emotional crisis, reach out to the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing or texting 988.
And today we are still in Florida. We are going a little deeper south into Florida on our way to Sarasota.
This is our the most south that we went on the tour. But now this definitely would be considered out of the way. But we picked Sarasota because that's where Moms for Liberty were born.
Oh.
Cue the villain music.
Thanks, moms.
Thanks, moms. But thank goodness for our mama bears doing the good work and our free mom hugs, fighting back. But we really wanted to make a presence in this town. And I'll tell you, I was in Sarasota. We did a little tour called the Southern Circuit Tour where they play films like this in areas that would need it. And we were invited, which is amazing. And so we were part of that tour. We went to Sarasota, then Fort Myers, then Miami. And so I was already in Sarasota prior to us getting on the road and really green lighting this project. So we had Sarasota in the can before we went on the road. And KK from the church, Harvest Church, approached me at the end of the screening on May 9th in Sarasota and was like, oh, if you're going to be doing this road trip, because I was talking about it. I was passing out like, hey, who can help us get on the road? Because this is expensive. But we really want to do this. And she's like, I can help with the church and I can help with resources. And I'm like, great. So Sarasota was the first place we had resources, and we greenlit the project without having any other place secured.
Wow.
So we operated on, we have half the money to do this. We're very cash poor, and we've got some credit, but on faith. This whole thing was on faith. So Sarasota came in first.
Was number 1.
And the church was great. It was really great. And Dan was our first community leader that we
Pastor
Dan. And they had their facility was amazing. Remember
it was gorgeous.
That screen they had?
Giant LED screen. Yeah.
I mean, talk about.
It was a wonderful screening.
Ooh, and unconventional Pastor Paul's talk, that looked great.
Yep.
Totally.
Had a great presentation. A little nervous about Pastor Paul's talk in Sarasota.
Oh, right. I forgot about that. We got a call from the pastor the night before.
Just concerned about what exactly is going to be said here about Christian nationalism or candidates and all the things.
Exactly, right. So Sarasota is a very conservative area, and our talk would push some buttons, but again, we're just talking history. We're just talking, I guess we are talking about the things you don't talk about at Christmas dinner. Politics, religion.
Yeah.
Who are you?
Pass the gravy.
Pass the gravy.
Paul's talk, for sure.
Right, exactly. And so our format was, you would introduce the conference, welcome everybody. Our community leader then would do the community building and reminding people there are local resources, reminding people to vote locally and get involved locally. And then we had unconventional Pastor Paul, who did this history talk on how people who want to structure power for their own political game have hijacked the Bible. And that's where we see the moral majority merge with
politics.
This politics, right, exactly. And so we lay it out as graciously as we can without pointing fingers. I mean, you have to mention names because there are names when you mention history, but it's touchy. It's a really touchy subject. So they didn't want us to not do the talk.
Right.
What they were concerned is because people were coming to see the movie, they didn't want them to leave after the talk and then not see the movie or feel like maybe they were tricked into seeing something else.
Duped into getting a speech on Christian nationalism.
Exactly. Exactly.
But it's funny because the conversations go hand in hand of elevating conversation about queer faith and LGBTQIA plus inclusion in church communities where they continually wish to be. And the whole biblical interpretations and to how to faith and nationalism come together or don't, the dangers thereof, how to do it in a healthy fashion. So it's all a big giant conversation that needs to be had. So I think after people heard Paul's talk. They were
Definitely.
like, oh, okay. They were so receptive there.
Definitely, yeah. And it was an older crowd there as well, too, older demographic, and the pastor afterward. So we did call the pastor ahead of time and reminded Dan and KK that this is our tone, same tone as the film.
Yep.
And this is our intention. And they said, sure, but we still switched the order. And it worked well for the night. We went back after that. We didn't switch any other time, but then Dan did. He said he was, not that he was wrong in it, but just that he maybe felt it was, he overreacted, maybe would be a better way to, I don't know exactly what phrase he said, but something along those lines where it's like, y'all were just fine. It was great. And it was actually, he said it was needed. It was refreshing. It was something that actually then really, it landed for him and it landed for his community. So that was really cool.
There's things being said that need to be said right now. And so a lot of things we've been told so long are like, oh, let's not talk about it. Let's not talk like that. Well,
no,
why
we
not?
have to talk about these things.
We've got to.
Because people are losing their rights.
To talk if we don't talk about these things.
100%.
So what's brought up in the film, what Unconventional Pastor Paul brought up, the documentaries like Bad Faith and God and Country from Rob Reiner, and the talk about what is happening to our country and even globally about sometimes the infiltration of Christianity into laws and rules, trying to apply a set of religion that not everybody subscribes to and doesn't wish to conform to. And you can't force God upon people. And I don't think God wants to be forced upon people.
Yeah.
So these are beautiful conversations we had. And you had a good sit down with Dan.
You actually did sit down with Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my name is Dan Miner. I'm a pastor here in Sarasota Harvest Church, and we are dead in the middle of a extremely conservative part of Florida, where, for instance, our 5 local commissioners are all straight, white, conservative people, men, that the city seems to be, for now at least, and county seems to be functioning on appealing to our governor, DeSantis, and that wing of the Republican Party. Well, we're ground zero for Moms for Liberty in Sarasota. One of the co-founders is here. And it really took over and went, they have chapters all over the United States, every state. And it was this idea that the school system was indoctrinating children, lots of information around or propaganda around the idea of indoctrinating children to essentially be gay or other things like that through books or through, having an inclusive pride flag in a classroom, even if it was 3 inches big in the corner. This idea that somehow the education system was making our kids gay, and it really ramped up during COVID because even though at the time that COVID had its outbreak, we had at least going into it, we had our government was Republican at the time. It seemed to be blamed on some sort of liberal agenda to mask our kids and to basically keep kids, parents from making choices over their children's lives. And so there was this movement of parents getting involved in the school system, really motivated by fear that they were losing control over the rights to make decisions for their children, which of course was absolutely not true. The government was dealing with an unprecedented epidemic all over our nation and didn't know what to do and was trying to make decisions in real time for something we hadn't faced in modern times. And it was a great opportunity that was seized by some people that had an agenda to seize control and power for local and state government. Moms for Liberty, actually one of the newsletters, quoted Hitler, said, of course, Adolf Hitler saying, he who has the youth or they who have the youth have the power. And that was their tactic. Their tactic was to attack anyone dealing with or teaching or instructing our children and to convince parents that their kids were in danger. And you don't have to have a rational argument to get a mom upset that their kid might be in danger. And so it was really preying upon people who didn't necessarily have better information. All the controversies that hit CNN and the national news regarding school boards in Florida really emanated from Sarasota, our county, something we're not proud of, something we've tried to do our best to speak differently into and have a voice representing God's heart for humanity differently than the way it's being portrayed locally, especially when it hit national news. But that's kind of what it looks like here. It's a tough place to have an opinion outside of the traditional conservative evangelical ideas around whether it's LGBTQIA issues or anything really when it comes to human rights. So one of the things I did is anytime like a pastor especially would go and speak in a derogatory or hateful way at the school board meeting, and it would get any sort of press or coverage, which usually was negative, thank God, I would go the following school board meeting and say the opposite. And that would get press and that would get traction on social media. And it was, necessarily wouldn't say the name of the church or really much self-promoting information. It was more or less like, I just want to tell you as a pastor, as a minister, that that's actually not how God feels. And, whether you're queer or you're a person of another color or you have a disability of any sort, at the end of the day, you are equal, included, and loved by our Creator, and whatever is being spewed in the name of God just isn't true.
I recently saw an address 2 weeks ago made by another pastor in the community to the school board and immediately knew I needed to attend the next meeting and offer a rebuttal of sorts to the hatred and vitriol that has been aimed at you and the courageous teachers of Sarasota County. I want my kids to learn the good, the bad, and the ugly of history of our nation and the struggles of the marginalized. Don't be bullied into hiding the atrocities of Stonewall Inn or the landmark legislation like the Anti-Hate Crime Matthew Shepard Act. NBC News reported in April this year that 1 in every 3 gay and bisexual youths have attempted suicide and are almost 5 times as likely to attempt suicide as their straight peers. I am deeply saddened and shocked that just 2 weeks ago, a colleague of mine would publicly shame LGBTQ youth in the name of God. Although it sounds naive, I hope to kindly but clearly come against such angry rhetoric and maybe heal some of the hearts of those that were hurt by the words that were reverberated in this very chamber. I believe that as a leader in the faith community, I must stand up and defend our kids from homophobic rants uttered from those whose lips are sore from sounding the dog whistle. If I learned anything as a pastor, it is that Jesus always hangs out with the marginalized, the hurting, and the unwelcome. And on behalf of the faith community, I want to offer my sincere apology to the students, teachers, and school board members that have had to endure endless grandstanding of so-called faith leaders. And I want to say that you are respected, you are loved, and you are appreciated, and I pray a blessing on each and every one of you. No one deserves to be yelled at the way you've been yelled at and treated with the disrespect that has been directed to each of you. Today, I challenge the faith community to speak life, to show respect for our community leaders, and to lead with love and to stand as a light in dark times. I am proud to be the younger brother of Dr. James Miner, who's the IB coordinator at Riverview High School. And he recently, in light of all the negativity, formed a Facebook group called We Love Sarasota County Schools. And in a very, very short period of time, they have over 1,500 followers. I challenge every pastor in our community with this question: are you throwing stones or are you catching them? We must be determined to find ourselves on the right side of history and the right side of the line in the sand, and we must make sure that we protect all of the vulnerable in our community. Thank you. Keep up the good fight, and we love you, Madam Chair, and we'll miss you.
Thank you.
We have this idea that light dispels darkness, right? And we're taught that. But when the ones that told you that light dispels darkness are then the darkness, then the real test comes. Can we actually shine a light bright enough to dispel the darkness? Because it was a dark cloud that moved over our community and is still here and we're still dealing with. Well, we lost 70% of our people and 70% of our income. It was very hard. The ramifications personally were great. I shy away from talking about the specifics of what I've endured or my family's endured, only because the people that were doing our best to defend and make space for their voice have endured way worse than I have. I'm a straight white, my sister, who happens to be gay and married, calls me straight-ish. So straight-ish, white, a cisgender male. And at the end of the day, I have a privilege. No matter how many times I'm being attacked, I have a privilege that most people don't have in our nation, especially in a red area. So I don't really talk about that, but it's been a lot. It's been a lot for our team, my family, our community, and really for the queer child who's trying to figure out why am I different and what does this look like for my life? And I think the statistic is 40% of kids that try to commit suicide or successfully commit suicide, teenagers and kids, are identify LGBTQ. 4 or 5 times the percentage of the population. That's on somebody. And I blame the church. I blame pastors. I think the blood is on our hands. And I think we got to do something about it. And I think the time Time is short, because every time somebody is silent or isn't clear or is, skirts around the issue or isn't forthcoming, someone else dies or nearly dies. Families are impacted in the name of God, and it's scary and it's wrong. So either we need to burn this thing down, and I mean that metaphorically, of course, as in the evangelical church or the Christian church needs to die and go away, or it needs to be reformed. Here's the crazy thing, and I'm not afraid to say this publicly. I am a registered Republican who feels like the party abandoned me completely. And I still hold on to that registration, not because I believe what the party or the leaders of the party believe now, but I joined the party years ago when it wasn't either as clear as they are today, or were saying something completely different. The party has left us that are in the middle. And I believe most people live on the between the 40-yard lines, not in the end zones. I might be a little bit one side of the 40-yard line. Someone else might be on the other side of the 40-yard line. But we all are pretty close at the idea of like human rights and human dignity, and dignity not being a non-negotiable. And that is being trampled, and has been for at least a decade or more. But I believe that our local elections, not just here, but everywhere, have more of an impact than our national elections do. I mean, our local elections are a big deal. These little primaries that aren't in November, that's coming up for us in August, people have to get out and vote, because those elections have massive influence. The president can make a decision or sign an executive order that will never affect my children's life, but a local school board member can make a decision in a vote where nobody's even in the room that dramatically affects how my child is taught or what they have access to. Today, New College, which made national news for DeSantis taking it over here locally, they literally have a dumpster full of books they've removed from their library that just came out today that they are sending to the dump. An entire construction dumpster. I have the photos on my phone, and I zoomed in on one of them, and one of them just said the Encyclopedia of Ethics. I mean, we're throwing out books about ethics, and we wonder why our political dialogue has completely gone into the pit. So, I mean, it's important to vote. It's important to be a part of the process. It's important to raise your voice. And I don't care if it makes mom, dad mad, or your neighbor mad, or you don't fit into your country club. It doesn't matter. You got to make your voice known, because otherwise it affects our everyday life. I'm so excited to have the 1946 film and the road tour and the crew here, and of course the producer with us, Rocky, and her team. I am a director. I am excited to have it, because I think it is a absolutely pinpoint. It goes after the number one thing that is holding people back from full affirmation for their families, for their loved ones, for their community. It's these couple of clobber passages, these couple of things that have either been falsified, mistranslated, or grossly taken out of context, that seems to be holding people back. And as I explained a little bit earlier when we were talking, I thought, we're really trying to get people's heart to connect with their head, because most people feel it in their heart when they look somebody who is queer in the eyes, a child, a teenager, an adult, and they feel like, hey, this person's just like me. They love like me. They look like me. They talk like me. They have the same emotions, but their head holds them back. And a lot of that comes from fundamentalism and the mistranslation that shifted a culture.
I stayed at Dan's house because, again, we're crashing on couches. We're crashing in guest rooms. And
Thank
thank
you,
you, Dan. And
hosts that
we
had
had
us over.
two different hosts
so well.
in Sarasota.
Yeah.
We were split crew in Sarasota. And Pastor Paul and I got to stay at Dan's house. And we did hear the history of Harvest Church, which was quite interesting. And so Harvest would be probably the only affirming space in Sarasota. Other spaces may be welcoming, and the difference, of course, is welcoming means you're not fully accepted as a queer person in that space, meaning you can't lead, you can't preach, some people can't even work with the kids and
your
things like that.
spiritual gift here is the parking team.
You're on parking team.
But as for leading worship or engaging in youth ministry, kids ministry, or anything with a mic,
we'll take your money, but you can't lead, and so, but the affirming spaces recognize you as a full equal participant in that space. And
they bless your marriage.
Exactly. And so so Dan has opened up that space now. It took a long time for that church to get there. But thank you, Dan, honestly, in all sincerity, for being brave enough to stand up.
Yeah.
with and for your siblings, and then to continue to do the hard work to have a group like us come in and challenge your community in a loving, caring way to be able to have bigger conversations. And we appreciate you. We really do.
And thanks for the taco truck outside the church.
Oh, right. The
That was
taco
nice.
truck.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we stayed well, we ate well, but that was a down, do the event, sleep over, and then head out in the morning.
That was our only drive, and we have an event the same day.
Right.
And so it's a great
It was
thing.
a
We had
whirlwind.
all new tires in Pensacola.
Yep.
And we did actually in Jacksonville, we did a full check on the RV. We took it in for the oil change, and we had them check everything, just again for safety first. And then where did we go from there?
We rolled out from Sarasota to Birmingham.
Where we actually had our first full day.
Oh, yeah. A first day off. So we drove the whole day into the evening. We got into Birmingham to our wonderful Airbnb stay from another generous gift. Thank you out there. It was 2 houses side by side. Man, they were so cool. Just awesome houses. And Birmingham, it's like a stylish, cool city with some flavor. And then the next day we got a day off. We got to go out for some barbecue with Brian and Kelly from
Making Things Right.
makingthingsright.org.
Yes, the Making Things Right organization. Brian Netzel started, and he's actually writing a book and works to help introduce people to LGBTQ people, LGBTQ Christians, building relationships, having conversations around these issues, humanizing. And, again, like, we can't really be making assessments about people unless you know people. And so it's a great bridge building between evangelical spaces and queer spaces.
And I think like something else I read on their website is like they just help families that are looking for answers of like, I don't know how to act right now, how to feel, how to think. They find other people in those similar situations of like, well, here's what I did with my son or my daughter, or when my child came out to me as trans. Here's the ways in which things went bad, and here's some things that went great for us. So I think what they're doing is a beautiful thing, making things right.
So I am just so glad that Kelly and Brian took the drive down from Atlanta to spend some time with us in Birmingham. But then we also got to hear a little bit about their story.
Had a little chat with them.
My name's Brian Netzel. I drove here from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm in Birmingham, Alabama as we speak. By day, I'm an executive coach with small business owners. And sort of by night is my side hustle where I do some nonprofit work between the Christian church and the LGBTQ plus community. The nonprofit work that I do now really was kind of a natural byproduct of just my life, I guess. I grew up in the conservative evangelical church, but I was gay, and I didn't kind of come to terms or peace about that until kind of middle age. But my whole origin story was in the evangelical church, and so I stayed. And so when I came out and sort of had to redirect that narrative within my church and my family and my conservative, like those conversations actually went really well. And so keeping kind of one foot in my church world and one foot in my new emerging LGBTQ plus community kind of always made sense to me. And those conversations just continued and evolved into a little more of a vocational work down the road. I stayed in the closet for probably up until almost 40 years old. I've always known that I was more attracted to men, but as a lot of us know, growing up in the church, that didn't feel like that was an option. It felt like the best way to honor God with my sexuality was to not do anything about that, and that was okay for a season, but it just became not healthy and unsustainable eventually at a point in my life where I really had to kind of lean in with God. And it really started when I hit a crossroads. A lot of my relationships and friends were moving or getting married, and it was just kind of a catalyst to realize, this is not sustainable for me. And I really sought, my heart and the Bible with new urgency. And I came out just really surprised at what I found. I thought that for me to have peace or even to think differently about it, I'd have to go after these 6 verses and make sense of it, right? Or whatever, the particular verses that speak to homosexuality in the Bible. And I found no resolution there, I really felt kind of God invite me back to just the simple story of Jesus in the Gospels, and really dove into the book of Matthew. And when I really saw how Jesus lived his life, and who he hung out with and who he didn't, and how salvation and a relationship with God is really quite simple, and that nothing could separate me from the love of God, I think really diving into the heart of the gospel is really what caused me to find a new peace with, oh, I think God's okay with this. It's funny, like we see in today's culture about how everything has gotten so, polarized and extreme, and the margins are getting really loud. But my experience has really been quite different. Not to minimize what's happening there, but I think the vast majority of people are somewhere sort of in this quieter middle, if you will. Like they might believe one way or the other theologically, but they're quite open to having more productive conversations about things as important as like faith and sexuality, especially if they have skin in the game, like with a kid or a friend or a pastor that's got one of their staff that came out, and what are they going to do about that, right? And that's always been my experience, that sort of the extremes I feel like that sort of hijacked the conversation. I think sort of middle America on this subject are quite open to finding more productive conversation about this stuff, elevating the conversation maybe beyond a debate in theology to how are we going to love each other? Maybe that's what our theology should be about. Becoming an organization, like we launched an initiative called Making Things Right 3 years ago. Kind of, you can probably tell just by the name what it's about, but it's really just inviting, curious Christians just really rethink what our response as Christians and what our responsibility is to LGBTQ plus people, especially those who have been harmed by the church. And I think when you can sort of present that in sort of a disarmed way, the majority of people want to lean into that. 1946, the movie I came across really just recently in the last couple of years. I think I had heard, about like that, maybe the word homosexuality wasn't in the Bible until whatever, and I had some familiarity with Kathy Baldock, who was a featured researcher in the movie. But I didn't even know that they were doing this documentary. And so when I came across it and saw how they kind of were able to bring that narrative together so effectively to help people just kind of step back and rethink this thing, I thought was super powerful. I thought something like this could be such a hot button item, but to do it in such classy and sort of collaborative fashion, where different points of view were represented and just really invited people to rethink this thing without a big agenda. I loved it. I've only lived in Atlanta for 10 years, and so I can only really speak to that period of time. But interestingly, a lot of it seems like our increased polarization on this subject and on other subjects has definitely, really ratcheted up in the last 10 years. So that's all I've seen. When I moved from the Midwest, it was funny. It was quite different there. I lived in Chicago and I lived in Minneapolis, and that's where I came out. That's where I sort of wrestled with these things in conservative evangelical spaces. And I found more of an appetite to, engage on this stuff and at least agree to disagree and to keep relationship. And then I moved down to the South and Atlanta is like a big city, but it's still right in the middle of the South, right? It's still in the Bible Belt. And I felt a whole lot more division, divisiveness. Like when I lived in the Midwest, I had gay friends, I had straight friends, I had Christian friends, I had non-Christian friends. Where when I moved to Atlanta, there was quite a bit more segregation, just even socially. My whole church felt white. You know what I mean? Like it was a stark difference. I do feel like Atlanta is pretty impacted by the South, and it feels it's a little more heated on these subjects and these conversations in that environment than it was in the Midwest for me. The fears of LGBTQ plus people are absolutely legitimate, especially our trans siblings, right? That's just all of a sudden become, the biggest hot button issue, sort of like as a friend of mine says, they're like the enemy that doesn't exist. So you and I, who have a trans friend or even like a trans acquaintance that we can see and trust and know, that destigmatizes this narrative out there. But unfortunately, some people don't want to have proximity and don't want to have relationship. And so I think especially the fears of our trans community are very legitimate. But even within, I live in a big city. So I think as a gay man, I have a lot of privilege compared to other people in the LGBTQ plus community, and especially in big cities. But in smaller towns, that can be a whole different story. It's funny. It's sort of like that analogy of the frog and the boiling pot. So you don't really notice that you're getting cooked, And so it's funny to think back to conversations around things like this 10 plus years ago, and I don't really recognize the temperature back then like I do today. But I'm also kind of a hopeless optimist too, because I think the more extremely polarized we get, I think those margins get noisier but thinner. And it leaves a whole lot more of us again in the middle, that like maybe if you like lean one way or another on this particular subject, such as sexuality or the Bible or what the Bible has to say about homosexuality, when those opinions get so extreme, I think it opens up the door for a lot more people to go, well, I can't take that extreme of a position. Right? Dr. David Gushee, who is a friend and colleague of mine and a big inspiration to me, he said, I think one of the byproducts, perhaps he would say, I can't really quote him, but perhaps what he would say is perhaps one of the byproducts of this increasing polarization is it's opening the door for a lot more normal people to think for themselves and to think a little bit differently on really critical subjects like this. How that has an impact on the church, I think, is it just gives people more permission to be more critical thinkers. I mean, any change movements in history has always started with a grassroots effort. It's always bottom up. Top-down change comes later. I think we've seen some top-down changes in religion when it comes to opinions about, sexuality and gender. Maybe those movements don't feel that big to some people, but when the Pope blesses same-sex couples, that's a huge seismic top-down thing. I think that, there's still a lot more to do, probably the Catholics might think, but that is always preceded with just like normal people like you and me kind of saying, I don't think I buy that anymore. I am an optimist. I choose to just be, but I choose to believe that most people are reasonable. I choose to believe that the majority of us are somewhere in between the extremes, trying to make sense of how do we reconcile our longstanding beliefs and compassion for people, especially if you come from a conservative background. I have a whole lot of, that's what kept me in the closet until I was 40 years old. I understand that tension. And when in my efforts, when I try to relate to other folks and their concerns and their hurdles and stuff, and I can relate to that, I can count on like maybe a couple of hands that people dismiss those types of conversations. The vast majority of people want to step into those conversations. I think the vast majority of people want to trust their hearts more than their heads on this subject. So I choose to have hope, mostly because what's the alternative? I don't want to live in denial of things that are going on that aren't okay, but I choose to believe in the best in people and that we want progress and that I see progress. And if you don't see progress, ask around, like talk to LGBTQ plus people, folks who have reconciled their faith and love Jesus. That changes the narrative. Talk to conservative Christian parents whose kids came out and really had to wrestle with their love for God and their love for their kids, and they came out the other side. Talk to brave pastors who have changed their mind and led their churches in different directions. There's some good, hopeful stories out there. It feels real good if I can do anything to help LGBTQ plus people realize that God loves them right where they're at. And then also to help, friends and family of the LGBTQ plus community to be a part of that healing and restoration as well. That's about as good as it gets. What I think America needs is what I think we all need, especially if you're a little late to the party when it comes to rethinking some of this stuff, specifically about LGBTQ plus people and their place at the table. with God and church environments. What I think people need is they need an on-ramp to this conversation, right? Like I do get some critique in my organization making things right because we have a whole lot of patience. For our target audience is conservative to moderate Christians that are ready to lean in and to rethink this stuff, right? And we'll take them wherever they're coming. And we get some critique that we're a little too patient, that there's a lot of there's harm out there and there's urgency. And I do believe that. But everybody deserves, even if they're a little late to the party, everybody deserves an opportunity and a safe community and a dialogue to lean in on this stuff and to rethink this stuff and to reframe their beliefs with compassion for people. You know, like our people of my vintage and older, like that stuff is baked into your DNA. It's deep into your bones. And folks don't want to get this stuff wrong, you know? And so to just like honor that and invite them into getting it right is sacred work.
My name is Kelly Mellon. I am from Marietta, Georgia, which is a suburb of Atlanta, but I'm originally from Southwest Georgia. I was born and raised there. I moved to Atlanta in 1998, I think, so coming up on a while now. What I do for a living is that I am the marketing director for Brian for Making Things Right. Making Things Right seeks to rethink the Christian response to the LGBTQ community. Basically, we want people to rethink how they think. We want Christians to act like Christians and accept people where they are. It matters to me because people matter to me. I don't have direct skin in the game as a cis, straight married woman, but it matters because people matter. My daughters have friends who are gay. I have friends who are gay. My daughters have friends who are transgender. They've taught me a lot about that. They've really opened my eyes to the transgender community and acceptance and awareness. And that's just what I want to love people. That's what my whole life and purpose is all about. I grew up conservative. I grew up thinking I was conservative. I feel like it was probably 2019, going to maybe even before COVID. I started to really do an examination of how I really felt about the conservative stance that I had. And it turned out it was more about financial conservative political view. And when it comes to human rights, I'm always going to choose human rights. I'm always going to advocate for people, especially marginalized people. When it became so polarized, it was just so completely divisive that I felt like there had to be those of us in the middle that really could see more clearly what was going on, that we need to be a voice. And I've looked back and I've always wanted to be on the right side of history. I think, how in the world did the Holocaust happen? Why weren't people standing up? People were scared. Why didn't people stand up to segregation? People were scared. Well, I don't want to be scared. I feel like God's given me a heart for people, and that's what I want to do. I want to use my voice and any leverage that I might have to speak up for people in any way that I can do that and to show them love. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is being scared and doing it anyway. I think sometimes that it's become that Christian is associated with MAGA. I don't want that in my life. I don't want for somebody, if I say I'm a Christian, I don't want them to automatically shut down and think that I judge them or think that I look at them through a different lens. So while I'm very much still a believer, I don't embrace as much of the Christian label anymore, even though I carry that in my heart and I always will. I just try to let my life be the light. I try to make it be that I love you and God loves you, and that's where we are. I think that's been the shift for me, is just not, I grew up in a culture that said that we were supposed to evangelize and we were supposed to save people. Well, that's not our job. It's not my job to judge. It's not my job to save. It's God's job to do that. And it's the Holy Spirit's job to convict. My job is to love. And that's the new posture I've taken on, just completely leading from love. I want to see us learn that we have common ground. I genuinely believe that we are better than we're acting as a whole. I believe that if we really looked, we would see that we all have things in common, no matter what we have different. My life doesn't look like other people's, and that's okay. That's what makes it better. And I think that's what we need to see. I think common ground is a beautiful thing to have. And I think we need to quit letting things like politics and religion divide us and learn to embrace diversity and accept each other where we are and walk each other home. That's what we're here to do. My daughters have been very influential. In raising them, I've also been raised myself as a human. It's interesting that they have just poured so much over my life as I've tried to pour over theirs. And in particular, both of my daughters have encouraged me to love people. They've encouraged me to be accepting. I don't understand a lot about transgender because I can't. I'm cisgender. I don't really get it. But what they've shown me, they've really been patient with me and allowed me to ask questions in a thoughtful way so that I learn and grow alongside of them, and just again, love people where they are. So my daughters are just incredible. They have always been allies. If either of my children or any kids I knew were afraid of coming out, I would tell them, I'm a safe space. You can come to me. If you need a parent, I'll be your parent. If you need a sister, I'll be your sister. I'll be whatever. I'll be a safe space for you. Because I know the statistics. I know that when there is not security and there's not safety, lives are at risk. I would never want anybody to take their life for trying to live their authentic life. So I'll be there. I'll be that person for them. I'll stand in the gap. I'll be what they need them to be. I just recently heard my new friend Lucas Hall is transgender, and I heard his story, and it absolutely just destroyed me that he didn't feel he tried to take his life multiple times. And the fact that he's here today as a transgender male and thriving in who he really is touches my heart. And so I just need more people to know that their lives are worth something, just where they are. Well, we can be accepting, we can come alongside of them. We can talk to them about their stories if they want to talk about them. Some people don't want to, but some people want to share their stories. And I think it's important. It costs us nothing to be kind, and it costs us nothing to use chosen pronouns. Just let people be people. Let's just love each other.
And we also had another friend come over to the house and sit down with us.
Another social media friend that we get to meet in real life. This one we've been waiting for a long time.
Kind of an icon. We're all like, oh.
Totally. No, definitely.
Fangirling over.
Fangirling for sure. And Paul actually got to have lunch with this guest, and you got to interview this guest. I, of course, because Dad is always busy, didn't get the day off that day. I know you all worked. Elliot worked. You worked that day doing the interview in the morning, which I appreciate. But I had so much going on that I was down in my pajamas that day, ready to what I thought I was, because y'all, I'm gray. I don't know if you know this. Spoiler alert. This is hair dye. And I needed it bad. So
we're getting all the secrets on this podcast.
You are getting the secrets. I was in that, so here I am ready to meet one of my TikTok icons who has a really great voice in helping people understand and actually sticking up for people and just really
dismantling bullshit.
I love it. I love her.
She just dismantles bullshit with that beautiful Birmingham, Alabama accent.
So I am a mess, and I come down and I am excited to meet her, but really didn't even get a photo. I thought I'd see her later, but she was so busy. She actually went the next day. The reason why she missed our event is the next day she was leaving to go to the Democratic National Convention and be there and listen and learn and see who she can meet and see what she can then bring back to Alabama. And her handle, so spoiler alert, who we're talking about, y'all might know her as Lindsay Blue Dot, being a blue dot in a red state. And Birmingham is definitely a blue dot. And that's what Lindsay has been known for a long time. But now, after coming back from the Democratic National Convention, she's changed her handle to Lindsay Progressive. And the reasoning from one of her videos that she said is she was disappointed in some of the things that I don't want to speak for. I would have to rewatch the video, but there was some things that she wished that specifically the Alabama Democrats could do better. And it's just amplifying her to use her voice more, to get active more, to amplify the politicians that she really knows are needed in places like Alabama, to stick up for LGBTQ rights, to stick up for women's rights and reproductive rights. And so anyway, that's where she was, and that's a little bit about her, and of course why we love her, and why I was a mess the day we met her. I met her.
She had great things to say, so listen to what Lindsay said to us.
My name is Lindsay Booker, and you probably know me as Beham Blue Dot on the internet. Beham is short for Birmingham, and I picked the name because we have these stickers. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but bright blue dot in a red state. I didn't know that I was going to have so many followers. I just got on TikTok to vent, and I just put Beham Blue Dot, and so that's what that means. So I think it was January 14th, 2021 was when I made my first TikTok from my car. It was just a few days after the insurrection. I was just looking around like, what the fuck is happening? You know? And I just wanted to vent. I just couldn't believe that that had happened and that Trump was still in office. I was losing my mind. So I got on TikTok to talk about all the things that I want to talk about at the Thanksgiving table, but stop trying because it's not worth it. Right. My sanity. I grew up in a conservative household, and so yeah, and I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and in Memphis where I lived, you just vote Republican, you just do. So I say that I'm a former Republican, but I don't even really think I knew what it meant to be a Republican. My grandmother was very conservative, loved Ronald Reagan. I remember her taking me into the voting booth to vote for Ronald Reagan. She checked me out of school to hear George H. Bush, the 1,000 Points of Light speech. I don't know if you remember that back in the 80s. Grew up going to Daughters of the American Revolution meetings with her. And so she was very patriotic. And she was a huge influence on me. And I don't know if she's rolling in her grave right now or. We moved here in 2004, but we left for Belgium in the early 2000s. Very conservative. I was in Brussels and I was talking to an American friend who I'd met there who I presumed to be conservative like me. And it was right after Hurricane Katrina. And I'd been watching a lot of Fox News. And I remember going on this big rant about Katrina and how people were there and stuck there and why didn't they leave and, you know, stop being so poor. I don't know. And in retrospect, it was a horribly racist rant. And she looked at me and she said, what about the elderly and the disabled? What were they supposed to do? And I'd never thought about it. You know, I was a 28-year-old able-bodied person and I just never really thought about things like that. And so I still need to call her. I haven't seen her in years. I still need to call her and tell her thank you for changing my life. It wasn't like a light switch. It was more like a dimmer switch, but that was something that got me thinking. And then, it's not funny, like it just took one question for me to start thinking outside of myself. Moved back left-leaning and have just gone further and further left. I've always been pro-choice, so that was one thing. I've always been pro-choice, and I was always pro-gay marriage. So my uncle's gay. I grew up being around a gay uncle who I loved very much and who was accepted by the family, and so that was never hard for me. When he came out, it was after his dad had died. My grandfather died. My grandmother, and then after my grandmother died, I remember him talking about she blamed herself for turning him gay because she bought him an ironing board when he was little. And anyway, he was laughing about it. But anyway, she loved, he had a partner, he had a longtime partner. And when my grandmother died, his partner, they had broken up, but he came back and was a pallbearer at my grandmother's funeral. She loved him. They had a very special relationship up until, so his partner had a very really, special relationship with my grandmother. And so I grew up, being around gay people, so that was never difficult for me. I started out, most of my content was, political, but then I was in kind of in the deconstructing world there. There weren't a lot of people back then on TikTok doing that kind of content. And I think that's why my account grew quickly. But now there are so many. And a lot of them have told me, like, you inspired me to do this. You gave me the strength to do this. So I can't change the world, but, and I can't change everyone's mind, but it's, it's kind of like a domino effect, I guess. People aren't used to hearing progressive ideas in a Southern accent. I think maybe that's some of it. And I think I'm very thoughtful when I make my content, and I try to make it palatable. And I always go back to that conversation that I had with my friend where I was going on this really like racist rant. And all she did was ask me a question, And so if you can just plant ideas, and if you can just make people think, they'll get there. I think, or they won't, or not, but I don't know what it is. I think it's the Southern accent. I really do. Someone recently in my comments said, you always give me something to think about. And I usually laugh, something like that. So, and that's what I want to do. I just want to help people think. I don't want to tell people what to think, but I've had people tell me, that they were Republican before they started watching my content. You know, so I know I've changed minds. I mean, I know I have for sure. Mm-hmm. I don't agree with a lot of the, the combative approach that I see so much. It's not helpful. You know, I never want to speak over the queer community, but I do feel like as an advocate, it's my responsibility to meet people where they are and, and remain calm. I understand why queer people cannot do that and why it's difficult. And same with any marginalized communities. I would never say you need to, take a calm approach. But for me personally, as someone advocating for others, that's something that I can do. Well, I think the most important thing, and one of the things that I've learned from making content, it's really working on yourself, honestly. And I've had to do that for myself too. I realize I still hold a lot of beliefs that are, I have a lot of internalized misogyny. No matter if you want to admit it or not, like anyone who grew up in this country and consumed media, we were indoctrinated to be racist and misogynistic. And so I think so many people, really the best thing we can do is work on ourselves and process our own trauma so we don't keep going out and traumatizing each other, So I do think that's a big part of it. And raising your kids to be kind and compassionate, get involved politically on a local level. So the thing about the Republicans is they've been playing the long game for a long time, and they've been at the local level, the school boards, that kind of thing, and we really need to be doing the same thing. And I'm so grateful for this film, really. I do think it's the most important film. I'm not just saying that when I've said it in my videos. I think it's the most important film of our lifetime. It is. The mistranslation that is like ruining people's lives, really. When it comes to gender and sexuality, God, I wish that Christians would consider the idea that God made everything on a spectrum, literally everything, every color, billions of species, every single human characteristic on a spectrum. Maybe gender and sexuality are on a spectrum as well. And maybe that's why we're having such a difficult time. Like one of the things that happened, we talk about on my, people talk about in my comments, and I've made videos about it, is trans women in sports. And it's so complicated. Is it fair? And you're talking about two things like, first of all, sports isn't fair. But then also, you're trying to take something that is on a spectrum, humans, and put them into two. It doesn't work, right? I really do have hope though. And I see it in the younger generation gives me hope, of course, as well. Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they're feral. They really are, but because they were raised by Gen X. But they're so much more accepting and kind, and they see the world differently in a better way, I think. And so they give me hope for sure. And they're going to vote. What would I say to the LGBTQ community? God made you the way that you are. And I know that it is the truest thing I know. God, it is the truest thing I know. It is the truest thing I know.
Love the voice, love the energy, and need more people like Lindsay sticking up for marginalized communities. And women, we're not marginalized. I mean, all right, hold on, sorry. We are marginalized, but we're not small.
Right.
You know what I mean? There are a lot of women, and imagine what we can do when we activate. And that's one of the reasons why there are people in this country who want to take away the 19th Amendment. And I'm not joking.
Right.
And insist that there's a one household vote. And even things like the SAVE Act that they were trying to push through, saying their agenda was to protect us from getting illegal aliens to vote. And we already know illegal aliens can't vote, but there's sneaky legislation in there to take away other people's rights to vote, and women are on that list. So we need to be watching very carefully what's going on.
Yep. And Lindsay is someone who does and speaks up with her platform, which we're very grateful for.
Yeah. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the 1946 web series podcast, The Culture Shift Tour. We have so much more to cover in this episode. We're going to have to split it into two parts. So join us next time for part 2 as we finish up our experience in Birmingham, Alabama, and then hit the road for our next stop. Thank you to our sponsors, makingthingsright.org, for your generous donation and helping us produce this podcast. And to Uncut Studios in downtown Los Angeles. Step into a studio unlike any other. To learn more, follow them at Uncut Studios DTLA on Instagram.